In a farming community where success was measured by profit margins and practical decisions, giving away 50 acres of premium produce seemed like financial suicide. When Jackson Whitaker donated his entire harvest to the struggling veterans' shelter, everyone in Millfield thought he'd finally lost his mind. What the townsfolk couldn't possibly know was that their biggest mistake wasn't questioning Jackson's common sense. It would be underestimating the ripple effect one selfless act could create. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rolling farmland of Millfield County stretched out beneath the crisp October sky. Weathered barns and rumbling combines dotted the landscape, speaking to generations of agricultural knowledge passed down through families. This was serious farming country, where success was measured in bushels per acre, and families had weathered everything from the Dust Bowl to the farm crisis of the 1980s. The annual Harvest Festival at the Millfield Community Center was in full swing. Farmers in worn caps and their families mingled beneath banners announcing this year's yield statistics, enjoying homemade dishes that covered long tables with checkered cloths. Stanley Wilson, whose operation was the largest in the county, held court near the punch bowl. At 68, his weathered face and calloused hands bore testimony to a lifetime working the land. "Heard Whitaker's place is in trouble again," he remarked to the group around him. "Third year of financial struggles." "Real shame," nodded Henry Parker, whose family owned the grain elevator that had been Millfield's agricultural backbone since 1945. Jackson's grandfather built that farm from nothing during the Depression. Thomas Reed, who ran the local farm equipment dealership, lowered his voice. "Saw him in town yesterday looking at classified ads. Word is he's considering selling the east parcel to cover equipment loans." The Whitaker farm had been struggling since Jackson's wife died 3 years ago. Once a showcase of innovative farming, the 200-acre operation had fallen behind as Jackson juggled single parenthood with modern agriculture's demands. The recent drought had only worsened an already precarious situation. "He's too proud to ask for help," Margaret Wilson said with a sigh. "Robert and James offered to lend him equipment last spring, but he insisted he could manage alone." "Man needs to be practical," Stanley added, shaking his head. "Farming's not just about working hard anymore, it's about working smart. Jackson's falling behind on technology, marketing, everything. His daughter's heading to college next year. Isn't she?" asked Eleanor Parker. "Can't imagine how he's planning to pay with the farm barely staying afloat." Stanley took a sip of his punch. "Jackson's always been different. Got those fancy agricultural degrees, came back with big ideas about sustainable practices. Some worked, some didn't, but since Maria passed, he's lost that spark. And now with Agricorp buying properties all around him," Henry added grimly, "pressure's only going to increase. They've made no secret of wanting to consolidate that whole section of the county. I give him another year before he's forced to sell," Stanley concluded. "Shame to see a century farm lost, but that's agriculture today. Adapt or get out." None of them noticed Jackson standing just outside their circle, having heard every word of their assessment of his failing operation and bleak future. At 45, Jackson still stood tall, though grief and worry had etched lines into his once youthful face. His dark hair was flecked with grey, and behind his glasses, his eyes carried the weight of too many solitary decisions. He wore a clean but faded flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. "Evening, everyone," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Beautiful night for a festival, isn't it?" Stanley's face flushed with embarrassment. Eleanor quickly tried to recover. "Jackson, we were just talking about my failing farm," Jackson supplied with a sad smile. It's okay. No secrets in a small town. Henry cleared his throat. How's Lily doing? Getting excited about college? Jackson's face brightened. She's great. Just got accepted early decision to Cornell's agricultural science program, following in her old man's footsteps, but she'll go much further. That's wonderful, Margaret said warmly. She's always been such a smart girl. Takes after her mother, Jackson replied, a shadow crossing his face. The mention of his late wife created another awkward pause. Everyone remembered Maria Whitaker, brilliant, vibrant, the perfect partner to Jackson's innovative vision. Her sudden death had shocked the community and begun Jackson's spiral into isolation and financial trouble. I should get back to Lily, he said, gesturing toward his 18-year-old daughter chatting with friends across the room. Good to see you all. As he walked away, he could feel their eyes on his back, their pity almost tangible. Stanley's assessment burned in his mind. I give him another year. The worst part was, he was probably right. Despite working from dawn until well past dusk, Jackson was losing ground. The drought had been the final blow, reducing his harvest by nearly 30%. Lily spotted him approaching and waved, her smile so like her mother's that it sometimes took his breath away. Tall and confident, with Maria's dark eyes and his stubborn chin, she had somehow thrived despite the hardships. "Dad!" she called. "Mrs. Hernandez was just telling me about the veterans' shelter in Riverside. Did you know they're struggling to feed everyone?" Jackson nodded a greeting to Elena Hernandez, whose son was currently serving overseas. "The shelter's been over capacity since they cut federal funding," Elena explained. "Lot of Afghanistan and Iraq vets needing help. My church volunteers there twice a month, and it's getting harder to put decent meals together." "That's terrible," Jackson said, genuinely concerned, despite his own problems. His father had been a Vietnam veteran. "I was thinking," Lily said, her eyes bright, "what if we donated some of our harvest? We've got all those storage bins of vegetables that the distributor rejected for being cosmetically imperfect." Jackson felt a twinge of embarrassment. The rejected produce represented another setback. Thousands of dollars lost because the vegetables didn't meet the supermarket's visual standards, despite being nutritionally perfect. "That's a nice thought, but, Dad, they're just sitting there," Lily pressed. "They'll rot before we find another buyer willing to take ugly vegetables." "Let me think about it," he said finally. Later that night, as they drove home down dark country roads, Lily was uncharacteristically quiet. "I overheard Mr. Wilson and the others talking about our farm," she finally said. "They don't understand how hard you're working." "A failing farm," Jackson finished quietly. "They're not wrong, Lily. The numbers don't lie." "But it's not fair," Lily protested. "You're the best farmer in the county. Your methods are more sustainable. It's just been bad luck. Mom, the drought, the distributor's ridiculous standards." "Life isn't fair," Jackson said. "Your mother used to say that, remember? Life isn't fair, but that doesn't mean we can't be fair to others." Their farmhouse appeared in the distance, a single porch light creating a lonely glow. "I've been thinking about the veterans' shelter," Jackson said slowly. "We've got more than just the rejected vegetables. We've got the grain, the root vegetables still in the ground, the orchard apples." "Dad, what are you saying?" Jackson took a deep breath, something shifting inside him. "Your mother always said we should farm to feed people, not just to make money. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." He pulled into their driveway and faced his daughter in the dim dashboard lights. "What if we donated it all, Lily? Everything. We can harvest in the next week. A full donation to the veterans' shelter." Lily's eyes widened. "Everything? But what about our payments, my tuition deposits?" "We'll figure it out," Jackson said, a strange peace settling over him. "Sometimes doing the right thing matters more than doing the practical thing. That's something your mother understood." As they sat in the darkened truck, neither could possibly imagine how this impulsive act of generosity would set in motion events that would transform not just their farm, but draw the attention of the most powerful person in the nation. Dawn broke clear and cold over Millfield County the next morning. Jackson stood on his porch, coffee mug warming his hands, watching the first golden rays illuminate his fields. In the crisp autumn light, the farm looked almost as it had in its prime. Rows of vegetables waiting for harvest, apple trees heavy with fruit, golden grain ready for combining. Only someone with a farmer's eye would notice the subtle signs of struggle, the outdated irrigation system, patches where the drought had taken its toll, the barn roof that desperately needed repairs. "You sure about this, Dad?" Lily asked, stepping out to join him. She wrapped her sweater tighter against the morning chill, her breath visible in the cold air. Jackson took a slow sip of coffee, considering his answer carefully. "I'm sure it's what your mother would have done." Lily's eyes misted slightly. "She always said our best crop was the one we shared." She was right, Jackson nodded. "I just lost sight of that when I lost her." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the farm wake up. 3 years of grief and financial struggle had taken their toll, but in this moment, Jackson felt a clarity he hadn't experienced since Maria's death. "I called Mrs. Hernandez this morning," Lily said. "She's contacting the veterans shelter. They can barely believe we're serious about donating everything." "We're going to need help with the harvest," Jackson admitted. "I can't afford to hire the usual crew, and there's too much for just the two of us." "I'll call some friends from school," Lily offered, "and maybe—" The distant rumble of vehicles interrupted her. A battered pickup truck appeared on their long driveway, followed by another, and then a third. As they approached, Jackson recognized Elena Hernandez in the lead truck, with several people in each vehicle behind her. "Looks like word travels." "Fast!" he remarked, setting down his coffee mug. Elena stepped out of her truck, followed by a tall man with military bearing whom Jackson didn't recognize. Behind them, nearly a dozen people, mostly Hispanic workers from the community, climbed out of the vehicles. "Buenos dias, Jackson." "Lily," Elena called, approaching the porch. "This is Michael Ramirez, director of the Riverside Veterans Shelter. When I told him about your offer, he insisted on coming immediately." Ramirez stepped forward, extending his hand. In his 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut in a military style and steady eyes that had seen combat, he carried himself with quiet dignity despite the worn edges of his clothing. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, his grip firm as they shook hands. "I hardly believed Mrs. Hernandez when she called. Are you really offering to donate your entire harvest?" "Call me Jackson," he replied. "And yes, that's the plan. It's not a record-breaking year, but there's plenty of good food in those fields." Ramirez's expression was a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You should know that we're currently housing 68 veterans from Vietnam through Afghanistan. Our federal funding was cut by 40% last quarter. We've been serving a lot of canned goods and pasta. Fresh produce would be—" He paused, visibly moved. "It would mean more than I can express." "Well, there's about 50 acres of vegetables and 20 acres of grain to harvest," Jackson said, gesturing toward his fields. "Plus the orchard. I can't afford a professional crew this year, so I hope you brought some strong backs." "Oh, we did," Elena grinned, pointing to the people gathering behind her. "When I put out the word about what you're doing, these folks volunteered immediately. Many of them have farming experience from back home in Mexico." Jackson was taken aback. He recognized several of the workers, men and women who typically work the seasonal harvests for the larger farms, experts at quickly bringing in crops. They were in high demand this time of year, often making premium wages. That they would volunteer their valuable time was unexpected. "I can't pay you," he said bluntly. A stocky man with a weathered face stepped forward. "My brother is at that shelter, Mr. Whitaker. After 2 tours in Iraq, he couldn't adjust. I don't need payment. Similar stories emerged from others in the group. Connections to veterans, appreciation for Jackson's generosity, a desire to help someone who was helping others despite his own troubles. The workers had brought their own tools, gloves, and even several pickup trucks for transporting the harvest. "I don't know what to say," Jackson admitted, overwhelmed by the response. "Say nothing," Eleanor replied with a warm smile. "Just show us where to start." What began as a simple decision to donate unwanted produce transformed into something much larger as the day progressed. Jackson divided the volunteers into teams, directing the harvest with the efficiency that had once made his farm one of the county's most productive. Lily worked alongside everyone, her college applications temporarily forgotten as she helped coordinate the complex operation. By mid-morning, word had spread through Millfield's tight-knit community. More volunteers arrived. High school students, church groups, even a few retired farmers offering their expertise. Jackson's quiet donation had sparked something unexpected in the community, a reminder of the cooperative spirit that had once defined rural America. Most surprising were the arrivals of Thomas Reed and his sons, bringing a small fleet of equipment from the dealership. "Heard you could use some mechanical help," Thomas said gruffly when Jackson expressed his surprise. "These are just demo models. Need to put some hours on them anyway." The modern harvesting equipment made quick work of fields that would have taken days to process manually. Jackson fought back emotion as he watched his entire farm mobilize in a way he couldn't have managed alone for years. By noon, the first trucks were loaded with fresh produce bound for the veterans' shelter. Ramirez coordinated with his staff by phone, arranging for proper storage and immediate use of the bounty heading their way. "We've never had this much fresh food," he told Jackson as they watched a truck depart, laden with tomatoes, peppers, and squash. "Never." The community response continued to grow throughout the afternoon. Someone set up a refreshment table at the edge of the main field. Local restaurants sent over hot lunches for the workers. A reporter from the Millfield Weekly Observer appeared, notebook in hand, asking for the story behind the massive volunteer effort. Jackson, uncomfortable with the attention, directed the reporter to Ramirez and the veterans' shelter story instead. "That's what matters here," he insisted. "Those men and women served our country. They shouldn't be worried about where their next meal is coming from." As the day wore on, even Stanley Wilson made an appearance, driving his newest combine onto Jackson's property without asking permission. Without a word to Jackson, he began harvesting the grain fields with professional precision. Lily sidled up to her father as they watched Wilson work. "Isn't that the man who gave you 1 year tops?" she asked quietly. "Farmers help farmers," Jackson replied simply, "even when they disagree about methods." By late afternoon, something remarkable had taken shape. Nearly half the harvest was already complete. A process that should have taken Jackson weeks was being accomplished in days, thanks to the volunteer effort. As the golden hour cast long shadows across the fields, Elena organized an impromptu meal for everyone. Tables pushed together on the farmhouse lawn, food shared family style. Sitting among the unlikely gathering of volunteers, watching Lily laugh. With Elena's grandchildren, Jackson felt a weight lifting that he had carried for 3 years. The farm that had become a burden, a daily reminder of his failures since Maria's death, was serving its true purpose again, feeding people, building community. Ramirez took the seat beside him, plate balanced on his knees. "You've done something extraordinary here," he said quietly. Jackson shook his head. "I just decided not to let good food go to waste." "It's more than that," Ramirez insisted. "You could have sold this harvest at a discount, found some way to recoup your investment. Instead, you chose to give it away entirely at significant impersonal cost." He studied Jackson's profile. "I've worked with veterans for 15 years. I recognize sacrifice when I see it. It's not much compared to what they gave," Jackson replied. "Perhaps," Ramirez acknowledged, "but it matters. I'd like your permission to share your story with some people I know. There are organizations that support both veterans and sustainable agriculture. What you're doing here sits at that intersection." "I'm not looking for recognition," Jackson said uncomfortably. "Not recognition," Ramirez corrected. "Support. You're helping us. Perhaps others could help you." Before Jackson could respond, Stanley Wilson approached their table, plate in hand. The older farmer stood awkwardly for a moment, then spoke. "That's a fine grain crop, Jackson. Better than I expected given the drought." "Thanks," Jackson replied, surprised by the compliment. "Your rotation method," Stanley continued reluctantly, "the one I called impractical last year, seems it made your fields more drought-resistant than mine." He cleared his throat. "Might have been hasty in my assessment." Coming from Stanley, this was tantamount to a full apology. Jackson nodded, accepting it for what it was. "Your combine made quick work of it," he acknowledged in return. "Saved us hours." Stanley glanced around at the diverse group of volunteers. The mountains of produce being sorted and loaded, the sense of purpose that filled the farm. "You've still got challenges ahead," he said, ever the pragmatist. "This doesn't solve your financial situation." "No," Jackson agreed. "But it feels right. First right thing I've done in a long time." As darkness fell, most of the volunteers departed, promising to return at dawn to complete the harvest. Jackson and Lily stood on the porch, waving goodbye. To the last trucks, the yard now eerily quiet after the day's activity. That was... Lily searched for words. "Unexpected," Jackson supplied. "I was going to say, amazing," she smiled. "Did you see how many people came, how much we accomplished?" Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Your mother would have loved today." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars appear in the clear autumn sky. "Dad," Lily said hesitantly, "what happens after the harvest is done? Mr. Wilson wasn't wrong about our financial situation." Jackson put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I don't know," he admitted. "But for the first time in 3 years, I feel like we might figure it out." He gestured toward the fields where so much had been accomplished in a single day. "Today reminded me that we're not alone. That matters more than I realized." As they turned to go inside, neither noticed the late-model sedan parked discreetly at the end of their long driveway, or the man inside making a phone call to Washington, D.C., describing what he had witnessed on a small farm in Millfield County that day. The wheels were already in motion for events that would transform Jackson Whitaker's life in ways he could never have imagined when he made his impulsive decision to donate his harvest to hungry veterans. The second day of harvesting dawned even brighter than the first. Jackson, who had grown accustomed to working his fields alone, was astonished to find an even larger crowd of volunteers arriving before the morning dew had dried. Word had spread beyond Millfield to neighboring communities, bringing farmers, veterans, church groups, and families wanting to be part of something meaningful. Local news outlets had picked up the story overnight. A television crew from the nearest city set up at the edge of the property, filming the coordinated harvest effort and interviewing volunteers about why they had come. Jackson avoided the cameras, focusing instead on organizing the work groups and ensuring that the harvest proceeded efficiently. "You should talk to them," Lily urged, nodding toward the reporters. "This is a chance to highlight the veterans' shelter's needs." "You know I hate that kind of attention," Jackson replied, adjusting his worn cap. "Besides, I'm needed in the orchard. Those apples won't pick themselves." Lily rolled her eyes but didn't push further. She understood her father's discomfort with publicity. It was one of many ways they were different. Where he was reserved and private, she had inherited her mother's outgoing nature and comfort with public speaking. "Fine," "Be mysterious, Farmer Whitaker," she teased. "I'll handle the media." "Just like your mother," Jackson muttered as she walked away, a mix of pride and melancholy in his voice. By mid-morning, the farm hummed with activity. The modern combines Stanley Wilson had brought had finished with the grain fields, which had produced better than expected despite the drought. The vegetables were being harvested by experienced hands, sorted and loaded onto a constant stream of trucks headed for the veterans' shelter. In the orchard, volunteers on ladders filled baskets with ripe apples, creating a harvest scene that could have come from the previous century. Thomas Reed approached Jackson as he supervised the orchard work, clearing his throat to get attention. "That's some operation you've got going," Thomas remarked, gesturing toward the coordinated activities across the farm. "Never seen anything like it in Millfield." "It's not really my operation anymore," Jackson replied. "Seems to have taken on a life of its own," Thomas nodded, leaning against an apple tree. "Been hearing rumors." "About?" "Phone calls to the governor's office, media interest from the capital, something about a potential visit from someone important." Thomas raised his eyebrows significantly. Jackson frowned. "Who would visit here? We're just harvesting some crops for veterans." "That's just it," Thomas said. "Story's gotten traction. Farmer sacrifices everything for veterans while struggling to save Century Farm. Human interest gold, and with elections coming up next year." He let the implication hang in the air. "I'm not interested in being anyone's photo opportunity," Jackson said firmly. "Might not have a choice," Thomas replied. "Anyway, wanted to give you a heads up. Town's buzzing with speculation." He hesitated, then added, "Security types were asking questions at my dealership this morning. Government plates on their vehicles." Before Jackson could respond, a commotion near the farmhouse drew their attention. A sleek black SUV had pulled up and several official-looking individuals in suits were speaking with Ramirez and Elena. "Told you," Thomas said quietly. "Better go see what that's about." Jackson made his way across the property, irritation building with each step. He had intended this donation to be a quiet, personal decision, a way to honor Maria's memory and help veterans in need. The last thing he wanted was to become the center of a media circus or political theater. As he approached, he recognized the emblem on the visitor's credentials, Department of Veterans Affairs. "Mr. Whitaker," one of the suited men greeted him, extending his hand. "I'm David Harrington, Regional Director for the VA. We've heard about your remarkable donation to the Riverside Shelter." Jackson shook his hand reluctantly. "It's just food, going where it's needed." "It's considerably more than that," Harrington replied. "The Riverside facility has been on our concern list for months due to budget constraints. Your donation is solving an immediate crisis for them. We wanted to personally express our gratitude." "And assess the situation," added a woman in a smart pantsuit who introduced herself as Catherine Moore, a special assistant to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. "The scale of your donation is unusual. We want to understand the full scope." Jackson shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "There's not much to understand. I had food. They needed food. Simple as that." "Simple acts of generosity are rare these days, Mr. Whitaker," Catherine said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Especially ones that involve significant personal sacrifice." Something in her tone made Jackson wary. "Is there a problem with the donation? Some regulation I'm not aware of?" "Not at all," Harrington assured him quickly. "In fact, quite the opposite. Your action has drawn positive attention at the highest levels. We're here to ensure everything goes smoothly and to gather information for—" He hesitated. "Potential follow-up." The deliberate vagueness of potential follow-up rang alarm bells for Jackson. He had spent enough time dealing with government agricultural agencies to recognize bureaucratic speak when he heard it. "Well, as you can see, we've got a farm full of volunteers and trucks heading out regularly. Everything's under control." He gestured around at the bustling activity. If you'll excuse me, I should get back to the harvest. As he turned to leave, Catherine Moore stepped forward. One more thing, Mr. Whitaker. Would you be amenable to a visit from senior VA officials tomorrow? Perhaps even cabinet level? Jackson stopped. Cabinet level? You mean the Secretary of Veterans Affairs might come here? Catherine and Harrington exchanged glances. Among others, Harrington said carefully, there's significant interest in what you're doing. I'm not looking for recognition, Jackson stated firmly. If officials want to visit the shelter and see the food being put to good use, that makes more sense. The shelter is certainly part of the itinerary, Catherine acknowledged. But your farm is where this remarkable story begins. It would be meaningful to see the source. The measured way she chose her words suggested to Jackson that there was more happening than a simple recognition of his donation. Before he could press further, Ramirez stepped in. Jackson, this could be invaluable exposure for the shelter's ongoing needs, he said quietly. A high-profile visit might lead to restored funding, expanded services. Put that way, Jackson found it difficult to refuse. Fine, he conceded reluctantly. But I don't want this turning into some kind of circus. We've still got work to do here. Understood, Harrington said, relief evident in his voice. We'll keep disruption to a minimum. Just a brief tour, some photos, perhaps a short statement. As the VA officials departed, Lily approached, excitement written across her face. Dad, is it true? Are government officials coming tomorrow? Apparently, Jackson sighed. Though I'm not sure why there's so much interest in a simple food donation. Lily shook her head in exasperation. A simple food donation worth hundreds of thousands of dollars? From a struggling farmer who can barely make his loan payments? During an election cycle where veterans' issues are front and center? Come on, Dad. Even I can see why this story has legs. Jackson hadn't considered how his actions might be perceived in the larger political context. He had been focused solely on the immediate need and what felt right. The thought that his personal decision might be becoming a political opportunity made him deeply uncomfortable. I don't want to be anyone's campaign prop, he said firmly. Then make sure this stays about the veterans and the shelter, Lily advised. With a wisdom beyond her years, keep the focus where it belongs. Jackson made his way across the property, irritation building with each step. He had intended this donation to be a quiet, personal decision, a way to honor Maria's memory and help veterans in need. The last thing he wanted was to become the center of a media circus or political theater. As he approached, he recognized the emblem on the visitor's credentials, Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Whitaker, one of the suited men greeted him, extending his hand. I'm David Harrington, Regional Director for the VA. We've heard about your remarkable donation to the Riverside Shelter. Jackson shook his hand reluctantly. It's just food, going where it's needed. It's considerably more than that, Harrington replied. The Riverside facility has been on our concern list for months due to budget constraints. Your donation is solving an immediate crisis for them. We wanted to personally express our gratitude. And assess the situation, added a woman in a smart pantsuit who introduced herself as Catherine Moore, a special assistant to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. The scale of your donation is unusual. We want to understand the full scope. Jackson shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. There's not much to understand. I had food. They needed food. Simple as that. Simple acts of generosity are rare these days, Mr. Whitaker, Catherine said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Especially ones that involve significant personal sacrifice. Something in her tone made Jackson wary. Is there a problem with the donation? Some regulation I'm not aware of? Not at all, Harrington assured him quickly. In fact, quite the opposite. Your action has drawn positive attention at the highest levels. We're here to ensure everything goes smoothly and to gather information for, he hesitated, potential follow-up. The deliberate vagueness of potential follow-up rang alarm bells for Jackson. He had spent enough time dealing with government agricultural agencies to recognize bureaucratic speak when he heard it. Well, as you can see, we've got a farm full of volunteers and trucks heading out regularly. Everything's under control. He gestured around at the bustling activity. If you'll excuse me, I should get back to the harvest. As he turned to leave, Catherine Moore stepped forward. One more thing, Mr. Whitaker. Would you be amenable to a visit from senior VA officials tomorrow? Perhaps even cabinet level? Jackson stopped. Cabinet level? You mean the Secretary of Veterans Affairs might come here? Catherine and Harrington exchanged glances. Among others, Harrington said carefully, there's significant interest in what you're doing. I'm not looking for recognition, Jackson stated firmly. If officials want to visit the shelter and see the food being put to good use, that makes more sense. The shelter is certainly part of the itinerary, Catherine acknowledged. But your farm is where this remarkable story begins. It would be meaningful to see the source. The measured way she chose her words suggested to Jackson that there was more happening than a simple recognition of his donation. Before he could press further, Ramirez stepped in. Jackson, this could be invaluable exposure for the shelter's ongoing needs, he said quietly. A high-profile visit might lead to restored funding, expanded services. Put that way, Jackson found it difficult to refuse. Fine, he conceded reluctantly, but I don't want this turning into some kind of circus. We've still got work to do here. Understood, Harrington said, relief evident in his voice. We'll keep disruption to a minimum. Just a brief tour, some photos, perhaps a short statement. As the VA officials departed, Lily approached, excitement written across her face. Dad, is it true? Are government officials coming tomorrow? Apparently, Jackson sighed. Though I'm not sure why there's so much interest in a simple food donation. Lily shook her head in exasperation. A simple food donation worth hundreds of thousands of dollars? From a struggling farmer who can barely make his loan payments? During an election cycle where veterans' issues are front and center? Come on, Dad. Even I can see why this story has legs. Jackson hadn't considered how his actions might be perceived in the larger political context. He had been focused solely on the immediate need and what felt right. The thought that his personal decision might be becoming a political opportunity made him deeply uncomfortable. I don't want to be anyone's campaign prop, he said firmly. Then make sure this stays about the veterans and the shelter, Lily advised. With a wisdom beyond her years, keep the focus where it belongs. Throughout the afternoon, signs of tomorrow's visit multiplied. County maintenance crews mysteriously appeared to grade the rutted driveway leading to the farm. State police officers drove slowly past, clearly assessing the property. More media arrived, setting up equipment at the farm's perimeter. By evening, the harvest was nearly complete. A process that would normally have taken weeks compressed into just 2 days, thanks to the extraordinary volunteer effort. As the workers dispersed for the night, Jackson stood with Ramirez surveying what they had accomplished. Last trucks will go out tomorrow morning, Ramirez noted. Perfect timing for the official visit. They can see the final loads being delivered. Any idea who's actually coming? Jackson asked. Those VA people were suspiciously vague. Ramirez hesitated. I've heard rumors, but nothing confirmed. Definitely the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Possibly the Secretary of Agriculture, given the farm connection. Jackson nodded, still troubled by the increasing scale of attention. As long as they don't interfere with getting the last of the harvest to your people. Jackson, Ramirez said. Carefully, have you thought about what comes next for you? After all this is over, the question caught Jackson off guard. He had been so focused on the immediate task that he hadn't looked beyond it. The reality of his situation came rushing back, the loan payment still due, the equipment in desperate Need of repair or replacement? Lily's tuition payments looming? Not really, he admitted. One day at a time. There are programs for farmers in transition, Ramirez suggested, especially those interested in sustainable agriculture or serving vulnerable populations. Your farm could potentially be restructured with grant support. Are you suggesting I turn this into some kind of permanent food donation operation? Jackson asked, surprised. Just something to consider, Ramirez replied. You've discovered you have a community willing to support you. That's rare and valuable. As darkness fell, Jackson walked the perimeter of his property alone, trying to process the whirlwind of the past 2 days. The farm that had felt like a millstone around his neck for 3 years had suddenly become the center of unexpected attention and support, but when the cameras left and the officials moved on to the next photo opportunity, his fundamental problems would remain. He paused at the small memorial garden Lily had planted for Maria near the edge of the east field. Her favorite spot on the farm, where the sunset painted the landscape in gold and crimson. The stone marker was simple, engraved with words Maria had often repeated, "We harvest what we plant, in fields and in life." "What would you make of all this?" he asked softly, as if she might answer. The gentle evening breeze rustled the tall grass around the memorial, not an answer but a comfort nonetheless. As he turned back toward the farmhouse, his phone rang, an unfamiliar Washington, D.C. number. Jackson hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Whitaker," a crisp professional voice began, "this is Samantha Reynolds, Deputy Chief of Staff for the White House. I'm calling regarding tomorrow's visit." Jackson stopped walking, shock rendering him momentarily speechless. "The White House?" he finally managed. "Yes, sir, I need to confirm some details about your farm for security purposes. As you may have guessed, tomorrow's visitors will include some high-level officials." "How high-level are we talking about?" Jackson asked, a suspicion forming. There was a brief pause on the line. "I'm not at liberty to confirm specifics at this time, Mr. Whitaker. A full briefing team will arrive early tomorrow morning to prepare you and your property. I would suggest being ready by 5 a.m. 8 a.m., Jackson repeated. Farm work regularly started early, but this level of preparation seemed excessive for a cabinet secretary. "Standard protocol," Reynolds replied smoothly. "Now, regarding your property boundaries and access points." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Reynolds asking detailed questions about the farm layout that seemed far beyond what would be necessary for a routine official visit. By the time the call ended, Jackson's suspicion had grown to near certainty. Tomorrow's visitor wouldn't just be a cabinet secretary. As he approached the farmhouse, he found Lily waiting on the porch, her expression a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Dad," she said as he climbed the steps, "I just got the strangest call from someone claiming to be with the Secret Service. They were asking about our internet connection and if we had any secure space in the house." Jackson sat down heavily on the porch swing. "I think," he said slowly, "we need to prepare for some unexpected company tomorrow." In the distance they could see headlights approaching, the first of what would become a cavalcade of security personnel, advance teams, and media descending on their small farm. The quiet donation that Jackson had intended had somehow caught the attention of the nation's highest office, and by morning their lives would never be the same. Jackson Whitaker had witnessed many sunrises over his family farm, but none quite like this one. By 5:30 a.m., his property had transformed into a hive of coordinated activity that had nothing to do with agriculture. Dark-suited Secret Service agents with earpieces and serious expressions surveyed every building, field, and access point. Communications specialists established secure lines, while bomb-sniffing dogs methodically worked their way across the property. "Is all this really necessary?" Jackson asked a stone-faced agent who appeared to be supervising the security sweep of his modest farmhouse. "Standard protocol for presidential movement, sir," the agent replied without elaboration, though he had suspected it after last night's phone calls. Hearing the word presidential spoken aloud still sent a shock through Jackson. How had his simple decision to donate food to veterans escalated to a visit from the commander-in-chief? Inside the farmhouse, another team was transforming his cluttered kitchen into what they called a secure meeting space. Family photos were being catalogued and temporarily removed from walls, furniture rearranged, windows secured. "Dad, they want to know if you have a suit," Lily said, trying and failing to suppress her excitement as she bounded down the stairs. Jackson frowned. "For what? I'm a farmer. I'll meet the president as a farmer." "They suggested at least a dress shirt and tie," Lily persisted. "I found that blue shirt Mum got you for her cousin's wedding." "It still has the tags on it." "Of course it does," Jackson muttered. He had avoided anything resembling formal wear since Maria's funeral 3 years ago. Outside, the transformation continued. The rutted farm driveway had been smoothed overnight and was now lined with small American flags. The harvesting equipment had been neatly arranged to showcase the nearly completed donation effort. Media trucks formed a perimeter at the designated press area, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. At 6:30 a.m., a woman in a crisp pantsuit approached Jackson as he supervised the loading of the final apple crates. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm Jessica Chen, White House Deputy Communications Director. We need to brief you on today's schedule and protocols." The next 30 minutes were a blur of instructions: where to stand, when to speak, what topics were appropriate to discuss, and which questions to defer to official channels. Jackson listened with growing discomfort, feeling increasingly like an actor being prepped for a role rather than a farmer on his own land. "Just to be clear," he interrupted as Chen detailed the photo opportunities, "I'm not making any political endorsements or statements. This is about the veterans' shelter and nothing else." Chen's professional smile never wavered. "Of course, Mr. Whitaker, the President understands your position completely. This visit is about recognizing your exceptional service to veterans, not politics." Jackson wasn't entirely convinced, but before he could press further, Ramirez arrived with the director of the Riverside Veterans Shelter and several veterans who had benefited from the food donation. They, too, were quickly absorbed into the White House machine, briefed, positioned, prepped for their moments in the carefully choreographed event. "Can you believe this?" Ramirez murmured to Jackson as they stood to the side, watching the preparations. "Yesterday, we were just trying to feed some hungry vets. Today, we're meeting the President of the United States. I'm still not sure how." "That happened," Jackson admitted. Ramirez smiled knowingly. "In my experience, authentic goodness stands out in a world of calculated actions. What you did wasn't for show or advantage. It was a genuine sacrifice for others. That resonates, especially in Washington, where sincerity is rare." By 9 a.m., the farm had been transformed into something Jackson barely recognized. His neighbors began arriving, directed to designated gathering areas by staff with clipboards and headsets. Elena Hernandez and her family were given special positions near the front, along with other key volunteers from the harvest effort. Stanley Wilson and the other farmers who had lent equipment were arranged in a separate group, their machines gleaming in the morning sun after being hastily cleaned by eager volunteers. Thomas Reed approached Jackson, looking uncharacteristically formal in a sport coat and bolo tie. "Never thought I'd see the day when Millfield hosted a presidential visit," he remarked, surveying the transformed farm. "You've put us on the map, Jackson." "Not intentionally," Jackson replied. "I just wanted to help the shelter." "Sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest ripples," Thomas observed. "Maria would have loved this, you know, not the circus." He gestured at the security and media presence. "But seeing the community come together, seeing you find your purpose again." The mention of Maria brought a lump to Jackson's throat. She had always been the heart of their family, the one who remembered that farming wasn't just about survival or profit, but about nourishing people and building community. In the whirlwind of the past few days, he had felt closer to her spirit than at any time since her death. At 10:30 a.m., the distant thrum of helicopter rotors announced the imminent arrival of the presidential motorcade. Secret Service activity intensified, and the assembled crowd was given final instructions about movement restrictions and protocols. Lily appeared at Jackson's side, wearing a sundress that had been her mother's favorite, her hair neatly braided. "How do I look?" she asked nervously. "Beautiful," Jackson said sincerely, "just like your mother." A Secret Service agent approached them. "Mr. Whitaker, Ms. Whitaker, please come with me. The motorcade is 5 minutes out. You'll greet the president." At the designated arrival point, they were led to a spot near where the driveway widened into the farm's central area. American flags had been placed on either side of a red carpet that seemed absurdly formal against the backdrop of apple trees and harvesting equipment. "Remember," the agent instructed, "address him as Mr. President. Wait for him to extend his hand first and follow his conversational lead." Jackson nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. He had never imagined being in this position, a struggling farmer, about to meet the most powerful person in the world. What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound rehearsed or trivial? The motorcade appeared at the end of the long driveway, a procession of black SUVs, police vehicles with flashing lights, and the distinctive presidential limousine at its center. The assembled crowd fell silent as the vehicles approached, the moment heavy with anticipation. As the motorcade pulled to a stop, Jackson felt Lily's hand slip into his, squeezing tightly. "I wish Mom could see this," she whispered. "She can," Jackson replied softly, his eyes on the limousine door now being opened by a Secret Service agent. The president emerged into the bright autumn sunlight, waving to the crowd before turning toward Jackson and Lily. In person, he seemed both more ordinary and more commanding than his television appearances suggested. A man bearing the immense responsibility of office, but also capable of genuine warmth as he approached with hand extended. "Mr. Whitaker," he greeted Jackson, his handshake firm. "I've heard remarkable things about what you've done here." "Mr. President," Jackson managed, suddenly aware of cameras capturing every moment. "It's an honor, but really not necessary for you to come all this way," the president smiled. "On the contrary, in times when our nation seems divided at every turn, acts of selfless generosity remind us of who we really are as Americans." He turned to Lily. "And you must be the daughter I've heard so much about, the future Cornell agricultural scientist." Lily's eyes widened in surprise that he knew this detail. "Yes, sir, Mr. President, that's the plan. America needs bright young minds devoted to sustainable agriculture," the president told her. "Your father's example of using farming to serve others is exactly the kind of leadership we need." For the next 45 minutes, the carefully orchestrated visit unfolded according to the White House team's plans. The president toured the farm, speaking with volunteers and veterans, examining the final trucks being loaded with produce, and listening attentively as Ramirez explained the shelter's mission and challenges. What wasn't in the plan, however, was the president's request for a private word with Jackson away from the cameras and crowds. "Walk with me a moment," he said, gesturing toward the apple orchard where the harvest was complete. Secret Service agents created a perimeter at a respectful distance as the two men strolled between rows of trees laden with the last of the season's fruit. "Off the record, farmer to public servant," the president began, his tone shifting from the formal cadence of his public remarks to something more conversational. "What you did here goes beyond a simple donation. You put the needs of veterans ahead of your own financial security. That's rare." "It felt like the right thing to do," Jackson replied honestly. My father was a Vietnam vet. He struggled when he came home until he found purpose in this farm. I've watched too many of today's veterans face the same challenges without the same support." The president nodded thoughtfully. "The Secretary of Agriculture filled me in on your situation. Century farm, innovative practices, financial struggles after your wife's passing. The kind of operation we should be supporting, not watching." Disappear. Jackson was surprised by how much the president knew about his personal circumstances. "It's the reality of modern farming, sir. Small operations can't compete with corporate agriculture without significant advantages in either niche markets or technology. I tried both, but after Maria died," he trailed off, not wanting to make excuses. "What if you had another option?" the president asked. "My administration is launching a new initiative connecting sustainable farms directly with federal feeding programs, veterans facilities, federal prisons, disaster relief. Guaranteed contracts, fair prices, emphasis on environmentally sound practices." Jackson slowed his pace, processing what he was hearing. "Are you offering me a government contract?" "I'm suggesting you'd be an ideal candidate for the pilot program," the president clarified. "Your farm's scale, your methods, your demonstrated commitment to service all align with what we're trying to achieve. The program would provide technical assistance, capital for modernization, and guaranteed purchase agreements." It sounded too good to be true. "Why me? There are thousands of struggling small farms across the country." The president stopped walking, turning to face Jackson directly. "Because you did what you did without expectation of return. Because you remind us that the heart of agriculture isn't agribusiness, it's feeding people. And frankly, because your story resonates in a way that could help us launch this initiative successfully." There it was, the political calculation behind the apparent generosity. Jackson wasn't naive enough to miss it. "You want me as the face of your program," he said, "not as a question. I want your farm to succeed and continue feeding veterans." The president corrected gently. "If your example inspires other farms to join the initiative, all the better. But the program stands on its own merits, regardless of the publicity." They had reached the small memorial garden for Maria. The president noticed the stone marker and paused respectfully. "Your wife?" he asked. Jackson nodded. "Maria. She was the heart of this place. She always said we should farm to feed people, not just to make money." "Wise woman," the president observed. "My grandfather was a farmer in the Midwest. He used to say something similar, that the true measure of success wasn't the size of the harvest, but the number of people it nourished." He studied Jackson's expression. "Think about the program. Talk it over with your daughter. There's no obligation, but the opportunity is there if you want it." As they walked back toward the main event area, Jackson found himself torn between suspicion of the political opportunity his story presented and genuine hope that the program might offer a path forward for his struggling farm. Either way, the decision would wait for quieter moments of reflection. The rest of the presidential visit proceeded according to schedule, remarks to the assembled crowd emphasizing the importance of supporting veterans and sustainable agriculture. Photo opportunities with the final trucks departing for the shelter, handshakes and thanks for key volunteers. Throughout it all, Jackson observed the practiced ease with which the president moved from group to group, making each person feel individually acknowledged, while cameras captured every interaction. It was impressive to witness, even as Jackson maintained his wariness about being drawn into a political narrative. As the visit concluded and the president prepared to depart, he shook Jackson's hand one final time. "Whatever you decide about the program, thank you for reminding us all what American values really look like in action." With that, he was gone. Back into the limousine, the motorcade reforming and moving down the driveway with the same precision with which it had arrived. The roar of helicopter rotors soon faded into the distance, leaving an almost surreal quiet in their wake. The farm that had been transformed into a hive of security and media activity began to return to its agricultural reality. As the crowds dispersed and the White House staff packed up their equipment, Jackson found himself standing with Lily, Ramirez, and Eleanor, watching the last of the produce trucks depart for the veterans' shelter. "So," Elena said, breaking the stunned silence, "a normal day on the farm, no?" The absurdity of the comment broke the tension, and they all laughed, a release of the nervous energy that had built throughout the carefully choreographed visit. "What did the president talk to you about in private?" Lily asked, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. Jackson hesitated, not yet ready to discuss the proposed program until he'd had time to consider it carefully. "Just farmer talk," he said lightly. "And your mother?" He noticed her memorial garden. Lily seemed to sense there was more to it, but didn't press. "What happens now?" she asked instead, gesturing around at the nearly harvested farm. It was the question Jackson had been avoiding since making the decision to donate his crops. With the harvest complete and the media circus departing, reality would soon reassert itself. Loan payments, equipment repairs, utility bills, and all the ordinary challenges that had seemed so overwhelming just days ago. Yet something had shifted. Inside him, the farm that had felt like a burden, a daily reminder of failure and loss, had reconnected him to his community and his purpose in ways he hadn't thought possible. "Now," he said slowly, "we figure out the next season. One day at a time." As the autumn sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the harvested fields, Jackson looked out over land that his family had farmed for generations. For the first time in 3 years, the future, though still uncertain, didn't feel like something to fear. 3 months had passed since the presidential motorcade had disrupted the quiet routine of Millfield County. Winter had settled over the farmland, blanketing the fields in snow and bringing the stillness that farmers had learned to either appreciate or endure, depending on their temperament. For Jackson Whitaker, this particular winter had become a season of unexpected renewal. The Whitaker farmhouse kitchen, once a place of solitary meals and quiet worry, now hummed with activity as Jackson spread blueprints across the worn wooden table. Seated around him were Ramirez from the Veterans Shelter, Elena Hernandez, Thomas Reed, and most surprisingly, Stanley Wilson, the farmer who had once given Jackson 1 year tops before financial failure. "The greenhouse positioning maximizes winter sun exposure," Jackson explained, tracing the design with his finger. "With the geothermal heating system, we can grow year-round at minimal energy cost." "And the veterans will work here as part of their rehabilitation program?" Thomas asked, studying the plans with a businessman's calculating eye. "That's the core concept," Ramirez confirmed. "Therapeutic agriculture combined with job training. The VA's research shows significant benefits for PTSD and depression when veterans reconnect with growing food." Stanley leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, but expression thoughtful rather than skeptical. "Never thought I'd see the day when the Whitaker place became a government pilot program. Your grandfather would have had some choice words about that, Jackson." Jackson smiled slightly. "Probably, but he also believed in feeding people and supporting veterans. I think he'd approve of the mission, if not the paperwork." The kitchen door swung open, and Lily burst in, bringing a blast of cold air and youthful energy. Home from Cornell for winter break, she had thrown herself into the farm's transformation with characteristic enthusiasm. "The media coordinator called," she announced, unwinding her scarf. "CBS Morning News wants to do a feature on the program. Launch. They're particularly interested in the veteran apprenticeship angle." Jackson sighed. The persistent media attention following the presidential visit had been one of the most challenging adjustments. His natural inclination toward privacy warred constantly with the understanding that publicity helped both the veterans program and the shelter. "Can you handle that one?" he asked his daughter. "You're better with the cameras than I am." Lily grinned. "Sure, Dad. I'll make sure they focus on the program, not on you personally." The program that the president had proposed during his visit had evolved significantly during the intensive planning phase. What had started as a simple concept, connecting small farms with federal feeding programs, had expanded into something more comprehensive as Jackson, Lily, and Ramirez contributed their ideas. The Whitaker farm would now serve as both a working agricultural operation and a training center where veterans could learn sustainable farming practices while receiving therapeutic benefits from working with the land. Food production would be split between supplying the riverside shelter and fulfilling contracts with various federal facilities. The program provided capital for modernization, technical support, and guaranteed purchase agreements that ensured financial stability. For Jackson, the most meaningful aspect was watching his farm transform from a burden into a healing space. The land that had felt like a daily reminder of failure after Maria's death was once again serving a purpose that would have made her proud. "The first group of veteran trainees arrives next week," Ramirez reminded everyone. 6 to start, potentially growing to 15 by summer if the initial phase goes well. "The Eastfield cabins should be ready by Thursday," Thomas contributed. "My nephew's construction crew is finishing the interiors now." The community involvement had been perhaps the most surprising outcome of the past months. What had begun as a spontaneous volunteer effort during the harvest had evolved into ongoing support for the farm's new mission. Local businesses donated materials, neighbors offered expertise, and even the town council had expedited permits and zoning adjustments to accommodate the program's unique needs. As the meeting concluded and people gathered their coats to leave, Stanley lingered, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Got something on your mind?" Jackson asked when they were alone. Stanley cleared his throat. "Been thinking about that section of my land that borders your north field. It's not producing like it used to. Soil's depleted from too many years of corn. Might benefit from some of those regenerative methods you're always talking about." Jackson waited, sensing there was more. "Thought maybe," Stanley continued carefully, "we could discuss some kind of arrangement. You need more acreage for the program expansion. I need new approaches for that tired soil. Might be room for collaboration." Coming from Stanley, who had built his reputation on conventional, high-input agriculture and had frequently dismissed Jackson's sustainable methods, this was nothing short of revolutionary. "I'd be happy to talk about possibilities," Jackson replied, careful not to show too much surprise. "The program includes funding for neighboring farms that want to transition toward more sustainable practices." Stanley nodded, seemingly relieved. "Times change. Farming changes with them, or we don't survive." He pulled on his heavy coat. "Maria always said you were ahead of your time with those methods. Guess she was right." After everyone had departed, Jackson sat alone at the kitchen table, the blueprints still spread before him. The house felt different now, still filled with memories of Maria, but no longer haunted by her absence in quite the same way. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had somehow transformed, making space for new purpose alongside the cherished past. The sharp ring of his phone interrupted his thoughts. The screen showed a Washington, D.C. number that had become familiar over the past months. "Jackson Whitaker," he answered. "Mr. Whitaker, good afternoon. This is Jessica Chen from the White House. The president asked me to personally confirm that he'll be attending the official program launch next month." Jackson had expected this call, but still felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of another high-profile visit. "We'll be ready," he assured her. "The first phase of renovations will be complete, and the initial group of veterans will be settled in." "Excellent. The president is particularly interested in seeing the greenhouse operation and meeting some of the veteran participants. We'll need to schedule a planning call next week to coordinate logistics." After finishing the call, Jackson pulled on his coat and boots and stepped out onto the porch. The winter afternoon was already fading toward dusk, the snow-covered fields taking on a blue tinge in the fading light. In the distance, he could see the newly constructed greenhouses, their curved outlines stark against the white landscape. Internal lights creating a warm glow that promised growth even in the depths of winter. He walked through the snow toward Maria's memorial garden. Though the plantings were dormant under their blanket of white, he had made sure the stone marker remained accessible. Brushing away a dusting of fresh snow, he traced her name with his gloved finger. "Wish you could see this," he said softly. "The farm's coming alive again in ways I never imagined." A movement caught his eye, a vehicle turning into the long driveway. The familiar truck belonged to Elena Hernandez, who had become a regular visitor and unofficial coordinator of community involvement in the program. As she approached, Jackson could see she wasn't alone. In the passenger seat was an older man, in a military veteran's cap whom Jackson didn't recognize. "Jackson!" Elena called as she parked and helped her companion navigate the snowy path. "This is my uncle, Carlos. He just moved here from Arizona to be closer to family. He was a combat medic in Vietnam." Carlos, white-haired but standing tall despite an obvious limp, extended his hand. "Ms. Hernandez tells me you're starting some kind of farming program for vets," he said, his voice carrying the slight raspiness that comes with age. "That's right," Jackson confirmed, shaking the offered hand. "First group starts training next week." Carlos looked around at the farm, his experienced eyes taking in the combination of historic buildings and new construction. "I've been looking for something meaningful to do with my time. Doctor says I need to stay active, and I've always had a way with plants. Elena mentioned you might need someone with medical training on site for the program." The synchronicity of the moment wasn't lost on Jackson. Here was a Vietnam veteran, like his father had been, offering to contribute his skills to a program inspired in part by his father's experience. The connections between past and present, between his family's history and the farm's new future, seemed to click into place. "We absolutely need someone with your background," Jackson said warmly. "Why don't you come inside? I'll show you the plans and we can discuss possibilities." As they walked toward the farmhouse, Elena hung back slightly, giving them space to talk. Carlos began sharing stories of his own experience with therapeutic gardening after returning from Vietnam, his initial skepticism and eventual conviction about its healing properties. Jackson listened, struck by how his impulsive decision to donate his harvest had set in motion a cascade of connections and possibilities that he could never have anticipated. The farm that had been slipping away from him, that had felt like a burden too heavy to bear alone, was now at the center of a community effort with the potential to help others heal while finding its own renewal. Inside the warm kitchen, as he spread out the blueprints again and watched Carlos engage with the plans with professional interest, Jackson felt a sense of rightness that had been missing since Maria's death. The grief would always be part of him, but it no longer defined his days. The farm had found its purpose again, and in doing so had helped him find his. Over the following weeks, the transformation continued at an accelerating pace. The first group of veterans arrived as scheduled, men and women of varying ages who carried the invisible wounds of service alongside their visible ones. Jackson watched with quiet satisfaction as they began to engage with the farm work, some tentatively at first, others with immediate enthusiasm. Carlos, with his combination of medical knowledge and understanding of the military experience, quickly became an essential part of the program. The veterans responded to him in ways they didn't with civilian staff, opening up about their challenges and accepting guidance they might have rejected from others. Lily, home for several weeks before her new semester began, thrived in her role, connecting the program with media and educational institutions. Cornell had expressed interest in creating academic partnerships, potentially offering credit for veterans who completed the training program and wished to pursue further agricultural education. Even Stanley Wilson, once the voice of skepticism about Jackson's farming approach, had begun implementing some sustainable practices on his own land after seeing the results in the greenhouse operation. The pilot program was expanding to include neighboring farms interested in transitioning toward more regenerative methods, creating a growing network of support and knowledge sharing. The presidential visit that had once seemed like the dramatic climax of Jackson's story had instead become just one chapter in an ongoing narrative of community renewal. When the president returned for the official program launch, the media attention would focus not just on one farmer's generous donation, but on the collaborative effort that had grown from that initial seed. One evening, as Jackson finished his daily walk around the property, checking on the greenhouses and new construction, he found himself again at Maria's memorial garden. The winter sunset painted the snow-covered fields in shades of pink and gold, creating a scene of tranquil beauty that she would have loved. "We're doing it," he told her quietly. "Creating something that matters. Feeding people. Helping them heal." He smiled slightly. "Not exactly what we planned, but somehow exactly what this place was meant to be." As if in response, the last rays of sunlight broke through distant clouds, casting a warm glow across the memorial stone and the fields. Beyond, Jackson stood in that light for a long moment, feeling a sense of peace that had been missing for too long. The farm that had nearly been lost to grief, to financial struggle, to corporate agriculture, had found its way forward through an act of generosity that had rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. The presidents and cameras would come and go, but the work of feeding people and healing wounds, both visible and invisible, would continue, season after season, harvest after harvest. In the distance, lights began to appear in the veterans' cabins as evening fell. From the greenhouse came the sounds of conversation and occasional laughter as Carlos conducted an evening workshop on seedling care. The Whitaker farm, once struggling under the weight of one man's grief and financial burdens, now hummed with new life and purpose. Jackson turned toward the farmhouse, where Lily had dinner waiting and plans for tomorrow's work to discuss. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Not just as a family, but as part of a community that had remembered how to support its own. The presidential motorcade that had once blocked his driveway had departed long ago, but the path it had helped open remained, leading toward a future that honored the past while embracing new possibilities. For Jackson Whitaker, that was harvest enough. The summer sun beat down on Millfield County, ripening crops and warming the earth with the particular intensity that farmers both welcomed and respected. 1 year had passed since Jackson Whitaker's impulsive decision to donate his entire harvest to the veterans' shelter, a year of profound transformation for both his farm and the surrounding community. Where once a single farmer had struggled against mounting odds, the renamed Whitaker Veterans Agricultural Training Center now bustled with purposeful activity. The original farmhouse remained Jackson's private residence, but the property had expanded to include training facilities, veteran housing, and state-of-the-art, sustainable growing operations. On this particular July morning, Jackson stood at the edge of the East Field, watching a group of veterans carefully tending rows of organic vegetables. Their instructor, an Afghanistan veteran named Melissa, who had been among the first trainees and now served as a program coordinator, moved among them, offering guidance with quiet competence. "Never thought I'd see the day when the Whitaker place would be teaching urban veterans how to grow kale," came Stanley Wilson's distinctive voice from behind him. Jackson turned with a smile. The older farmer's skepticism had evolved into grudging respect and eventually genuine support over the past year. His own farm had begun implementing many of the sustainable practices he once dismissed as impractical idealism. "Never thought I'd see the day when Stanley Wilson would be growing cover crops and reducing chemical inputs," Jackson countered good-naturedly. Stanley shrugged, adjusting his ever-present cap. "Numbers don't lie. Soil health's improved 20% since we started the new rotation system. Input costs down nearly 30%. Hard to argue with results like that." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, two farmers appreciating the sight of healthy crops and purposeful work. The program had expanded significantly since its inception, now including 15 neighboring farms in various stages of transitioning toward more sustainable methods. The government contracts provided financial stability, while the knowledge-sharing network offered technical support and community reinforcement. "How's Lily doing at Cornell?" Stanley asked. "Still planning to come back home after graduation?" "Absolutely," Jackson confirmed. "She's already designed the expansion for the teaching greenhouse, wants to launch a school program connecting local kids with veterans and agriculture." "Like mother, like daughter," Stanley observed, knowing it was the highest compliment he could offer. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. A small convoy was making its way up the farm's main drive, now properly paved and lined with native flowering plants that attracted pollinators to the crops. "The Washington folks are early," Jackson noted, checking his watch. "Typical." The quarterly program review was scheduled for today, with representatives from the Department of Agriculture, Veterans Affairs, and several other agencies arriving to assess progress and discuss expansion plans. What had begun as a pilot program on a single, struggling farm had become a model being replicated in rural communities across 5 states. "Want me to run interference while you finish your morning rounds?" Stanley offered, knowing Jackson's discomfort with the bureaucratic aspects of the program, despite his growing skill at navigating them. "I appreciate it, but better face the music directly," Jackson replied with a resigned smile. "Ramirez and Elena should already be in the conference room setting up. Carlos has the veterans' progress reports ready." As they walked toward the main complex, Jackson reflected on how much had changed in a single year. The presidential visit that had seemed like an endpoint had actually been just the beginning. The media attention had eventually faded from national headlines to occasional features, allowing the real work to continue without constant scrutiny. The most meaningful changes weren't the visible transformations to the property, but the less obvious healing that had occurred. 28 veterans had completed the initial 6-month training program, with 18 now employed in agricultural positions, and 5 starting their own small farming operations with program support. Their stories of recovery from trauma, addiction, and hopelessness through connection with the land formed the true measure of the program's success. For Jackson personally, the year had brought a gradual lightening of the grief that had weighed him down since Maria's death. The farm that had been their shared dream had found a new purpose that honored her values, while creating something she could never have envisioned. He still visited her memorial garden daily, but the conversations had evolved from apologies and regrets to sharing achievements and plans for the future. Inside the main building, a renovated barn that now housed classrooms, offices, and meeting spaces, Jackson found the usual controlled chaos of a federal site visit in progress. Elena Hernandez, who had officially joined the program as Community Outreach Coordinator, was directing a small army of local volunteers preparing lunch from the farm's produce. Ramirez and Carlos were reviewing presentation materials with Thomas Reed, who served on the program's advisory board. "Jackson," called Jessica Chen, the White House liaison who had remained involved with the program since the presidential visit. She approached with a tablet in hand, looking as crisp and professional as ever, despite the summer heat. "We need to confirm a few details about next month's anniversary event." The first anniversary of the program was being marked with a significant expansion announcement, and the president had indicated interest in returning for the occasion. Jackson had become more comfortable with the public relations aspects of his role, recognizing their importance to sustaining support for the program, but still preferred the hands-on agricultural work to ceremonies and speeches. "Can we do that?" "After the review meeting," he asked. "I'd like to touch base with the trainees before we get started." Jessica nodded understanding. "Of course, but don't forget we need to finalize the list of veteran speakers by tomorrow." As the morning progressed, Jackson moved between his various responsibilities with a confidence that had developed gradually over the past year. He checked in with the veterans working in the fields, consulted with the program's agricultural specialists about an issue in the apple orchard, and finally joined the federal review team for their formal assessment. The meeting proceeded efficiently, with program outcomes exceeding targets in most areas. The veterans' employment rate post-training was particularly impressive, as was the data on reduced symptoms of PTSD and depression among participants. The sustainable farming methods had produced yields comparable to conventional approaches, but with significantly improved soil health metrics and reduced environmental impact. "The administration is extremely pleased with the results," noted the senior USDA representative. "There's strong support for the National Expansion Plan. We're prepared to serve as a training hub for new program sites," Jackson confirmed, reviewing the proposal they had developed. "But it's essential that each location adapt to local conditions and community needs. This isn't a one-size-fits-all model." The discussion continued through lunch, served at tables set up beneath shade trees near the greenhouses, featuring produce harvested that morning by the veteran trainees. Local community members mingled with federal officials, creating connections that would have seemed improbable just a year earlier. As the review concluded and the officials prepared to depart, Jackson found himself walking with Jessica Chen toward the parking area. "You know," she observed, "when we first met, you could barely make it through a prepared statement without looking like you wanted to disappear. Now you're advocating policy positions and negotiating program expansions with cabinet secretaries." Jackson smiled slightly. "Necessity is a powerful teacher. The program matters more than my comfort level." "The president still talks about that private conversation you had in the orchard," Jessica revealed. "He says it was one of the most authentic exchanges of his presidency." "Tell him the invitation to return for harvest season still stands," Jackson replied. "No cameras, no press, just picking apples with the veterans. He'd enjoy it," Jessica laughed. "I'll pass that along, though Secret Service might have some objections." After the officials had departed, Jackson took a few moments alone, walking to the highest point on his property, a gentle rise that offered a view across the entire farm and beyond to neighboring operations. From this vantage point, he could see the full scope of what had been accomplished in a year of intensive effort. The neglected fields that had symbolized his failure were now thriving with diverse crops. The renewable energy systems, solar arrays, and small wind turbines reduced operating costs while demonstrating sustainable technologies. The once empty outbuildings hummed with activity as veterans learned skills ranging from equipment maintenance to food processing. Beyond his property, lines the impact rippled outward. Stanley Wilson's farm showed the distinctive patterns of cover cropping and reduced tillage, practices he had once ridiculed. Several other neighboring properties displayed similar signs of transitioning toward more sustainable methods. The veterans' housing area, once just hastily renovated cabins, had evolved into a small, intentional community with shared spaces and support systems. Jackson's phone rang, interrupting his reflections. Lily's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, "Dad," her voice came through, bright with excitement, "just got out of my meeting with the Cornell Extension Office. They've approved the educational partnership. We can offer accredited courses through the training center starting next spring." "That's fantastic news," Jackson replied, genuinely pleased. Lily's vision of creating educational pathways for veterans interested in agricultural careers had been a focus of her studies. "Does this mean you'll be home more often to help implement it?" "Actually," Lily said, a smile evident in her voice, "they've offered me a position coordinating the partnership. I'd split my time between Cornell and the farm while finishing my degree. It's perfect, Dad." The prospect of having Lily more regularly involved with the farm brought Jackson deep satisfaction. Though she had returned for breaks and special events, her studies had kept her away for much of the program's development. Her increasing involvement felt like another piece of the farm's future falling into place. "Your mother would be so proud of what you're creating," he told her softly. "Of what we're creating," Lily corrected. "This all started with your decision. Dad, remember when everyone thought you'd lost your mind donating that harvest?" Jackson chuckled. "Stanley Wilson gave me 1 year tops before I'd have to sell the farm. Now he's implementing our rotation recommendations and talking about soil microbiology." "Speaking of unexpected transformations," Lily replied, "have you checked your email today? The White House sent over the final plans for the anniversary event. The president is confirmed, along with 3 cabinet secretaries and both senators." "Great," Jackson said with mild resignation. "More security sweeps and protocol briefings. Small price to pay for announcing the national expansion," Lily reminded him. 20 new sites across the country, Dad. Hundreds more veterans getting the support they need. Thousands of acres transitioning to sustainable practices. She was right, of course. The public events, media attention, and political connections, uncomfortable, as they sometimes were, served the larger purpose. What had begun as one farmer's impulsive act of generosity had evolved into a movement with the potential to transform both veterans' lives and agricultural practices across the country. As evening approached, Jackson completed his daily routine with a visit to Maria's memorial garden. The summer plantings were in full bloom, all her favorites, tended now by veterans who found healing in nurturing growing things. "You wouldn't recognize the place," he told her, settling on the small bench that had been added to the garden. "Sometimes I barely recognize it myself." A comfortable silence fell as the day's heat began to ease. In the distance, laughter drifted from the community kitchen, where veterans and staff were preparing the evening meal. The sound of tractors returning to the equipment barn signaled the end of the day's fieldwork. "I think I finally understand what you meant," Jackson continued softly. "About farming to feed people, not just to make money. About how sharing what we grow connects us to something larger than ourselves." He smiled slightly. "Took me long enough to figure it out." As dusk settled over Millfield County, the lights came on across the Whitaker Veterans Agricultural Training Center, a beacon of renewal in the rural landscape. The presidential motorcade that had once seemed like an incongruous intrusion now represented just one chapter in a continuing story of transformation. The small-town farmer who had donated his harvest out of desperation and principle had found not only a way to save his family farm, but a purpose that extended far beyond his fields. The century of agricultural history on the Whitaker land had entered a new phase, one that honored tradition while embracing innovation, that respected the land while serving those who had served their country. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new veterans seeking healing, new opportunities to grow both crops and community. But tonight, in the peaceful twilight of a summer evening, Jackson Whitaker sat contentedly in the garden of remembrance, surrounded by the living legacy that had grown from one harvest freely given. "We did it, Maria," he whispered as the first stars appeared overhead. "We found our way home." The path forward stretched before him, no longer shadowed by grief and financial worry, but illuminated by purpose and possibility. Whatever came next, presidential visits or program expansions, challenges or achievements, the heart of what mattered remained simple. Good land, tended with care, feeding both bodies and souls, season after season, harvest after harvest, one day at a time. The autumn colors painted Millfield County in a tapestry of gold, crimson, and amber, as a school bus filled with excited children rumbled up the long driveway of what was now nationally known as the Whitaker Center for Veterans and Sustainable Agriculture. 5 years had passed since Jackson's initial donation, and what had begun as one farmer's impulsive act of generosity had blossomed into something no one could have predicted. Lily Whitaker Ramirez stood at the entrance to the educational facility, watching the approaching bus with a smile. At 23, she had completed her Cornell degree in agricultural sciences and returned home to take a leadership role in the center's expanding educational programs. Her marriage to Miguel Ramirez, the nephew of both Elena Hernandez and Michael Ramirez, had further cemented the bonds between the families that had formed the core of the center's beginning. "Ready for the invasion?" asked her father, joining her with a cup of coffee in hand. Jackson, now 50, had weathered well over the past 5 years. The worry lines that had once etched his face had softened, replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. His hair had more gray now, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his purpose. "Fourth-grade field trips are my favorite," Lily replied. "Young enough to be excited about everything, old enough to actually remember what they learn." As the bus stopped and children began pouring out under the watchful eyes of their teachers, Jackson stepped back, content to let Lily take the lead. Teaching had never been his strength, but watching his daughter guide a new generation in understanding the connections between agriculture, sustainability, and service filled him with quiet pride. "Welcome to the Whitaker Center," Lily called, to the assembled children. "Who can tell me what we do here?" A dozen hands shot into the air, eager faces looking up at her. She pointed to a small girl with braided hair. "You grow food for veterans and teach them to be farmers," the child answered confidently. "That's right," Lily confirmed. "And today you're going to help us harvest apples that will feed veterans and their families across the state. You'll also learn about sustainable farming practices and why they matter for our future." The tour began with well-practiced efficiency, the children divided into groups led by staff and veteran trainees. The center had hosted thousands of students over the years, the educational program becoming as integral to its mission as the veteran training and sustainable agriculture research. Jackson made his way to the administrative building, the renovated barn that now housed offices, meeting spaces, and a small museum documenting the center's history. The wall of honor near the entrance displayed photographs of every veteran who had completed the program, over 200 faces now, each representing a life touched by the work that happened here. Carlos Hernandez, now the center's senior training coordinator, met him in the conference room where the quarterly board meeting was about to begin. At 73, the Vietnam veteran moved more slowly than when he'd first arrived, but his mind remained sharp and his commitment unwavering. "The delegation from Nebraska arrived last night," Carlos reported. "They've toured 3 other replication sites but wanted to see the original before finalizing their state funding. The Whitaker model had spread to 27 states now, each center adapted to local conditions and needs, but sharing the core mission of supporting veterans through sustainable agriculture. As the founding site, the Millfield operation had become a training hub for program developers and a living laboratory for refining methods. Board members began filing in, a diverse group including local farmers, veteran representatives, agricultural experts, and government officials. Stanley Wilson, now semi-retired and serving as the board's vice chairman, took his seat beside Jackson with a gruff nod of greeting. "Saw the school bus," he remarked. "Another education day?" "Lily's got them harvesting apples," Jackson confirmed. "Miguel's doing the sustainability workshop. Good timing with the CBS crew coming tomorrow," Stanley noted. "Kids and veterans make for positive coverage." The national news feature was tied to the upcoming presidential election, with candidates from both parties citing the Whitaker program as a bipartisan success story. The center's work had transcended political divisions, earning support across the spectrum by delivering measurable results for veterans, agricultural sustainability, and rural economic development. As the meeting began, the center's executive director, a retired Army colonel who had joined the team 3 years earlier, presented key metrics and future plans. The program boasted an 87% success rate for veteran participants, whether measured by employment, continued education, or reduced symptoms of PTSD and depression. The Agricultural Research Division had documented significant improvements in soil health, water conservation, and production efficiency through their sustainable methods. "The Nebraska delegation has one primary concern," the director explained, highlighting a slide in her presentation. "Their state has more extensive drought conditions than we face here. They're particularly interested in our water conservation techniques. We should connect them with the Arizona site," Jackson suggested. "They've adapted our methods for desert conditions with impressive results." The discussion continued, addressing challenges and opportunities with the practical focus that had characterized the center since its inception. Despite its growth and visibility, the operation maintained the pragmatic, results-oriented approach of its farming roots. After the meeting, Jackson gave the Nebraska visitors a personal tour of the original farm sections, explaining how the operation had evolved from a struggling family farm to a comprehensive training and research center. "It's hard to believe this all started with one harvest donation," remarked the Nebraska state senator as they walked through the apple orchard, where children were filling baskets with ripe fruit. "Sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest ripples," Jackson replied, unconsciously echoing Thomas Reed's words from years earlier. As they approached Maria's Memorial Garden, now expanded into a peaceful retreat space where veterans often spent quiet moments, Jackson paused to greet an older man sitting on a bench among the flowers. Jim Bennett had been among the first veteran trainees and now served as a peer mentor for new participants, his calm presence and wisdom offering guidance that professional therapists couldn't always provide. "Good day for a garden visit?" Jackson observed, taking a seat beside him. "Anniversary of my combat injury," Jim explained quietly. 30 years today, used to spend this day at the bottom of a bottle. Now I spend it growing things instead of remembering what I destroyed." He gestured toward the flourishing plants around them. "Better medicine by far." Moments like these, far from cameras or official metrics, represented the true heart of what the center had become. The healing that happened in these fields and gardens couldn't always be quantified in reports or captured in news features, but it formed the foundation of the center's purpose. Later that afternoon, as Jackson walked toward the eastern expansion area where new training facilities were under construction, he spotted a familiar black SUV approaching. Government vehicles still triggered a momentary tension in him, a remnant of those chaotic days following the presidential visit years ago. The vehicle stopped, and Jessica Chen emerged, now serving as an advisor to the Federal Task Force on Veteran Services. Though no longer officially with the White House, she had maintained her connection to the program through various roles over the years. "Wasn't expecting you until tomorrow with the media team," Jackson greeted her. "Came early to give you a heads up," she replied. "The President wants to announce a significant expansion of federal support during tomorrow's visit. Funding for 10 new centers and enhanced research grants for the existing network." Jackson nodded, processing the information. Presidential politics still made him wary, even after years of navigating those waters. "Election season brings generous announcements," he noted dryly. Jessica smiled, acknowledging his perpetual skepticism of political motives. "The funding's already appropriated, Jackson. This is happening regardless of the election outcome. Both parties have seen the data. The program works. Veterans heal, sustainable agriculture advances, rural communities benefit. It's as close to a political no-brainer as exists these days." As they walked together toward the administrative building, Jessica asked, "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if you hadn't decided to donate that harvest?" The question gave Jackson pause. He had rarely allowed himself to consider the alternative path. The struggling farm sliding into foreclosure, Lily's education dreams possibly derailed, the hundreds of veterans who might never have found healing through this program. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it wasn't really a choice, not in the way people think. It was just the right thing to do in that moment." "One right choice that changed everything," Jessica observed. "Not just for you and your family, but for so many others." That evening, after the visitors had departed and the day's activities concluded, Jackson joined Lily and Miguel for dinner at their home, a modern, energy-efficient residence built on the original farm property. Their 2-year-old daughter, Maria Elena, named for both grandmothers, played contentedly with blocks on a colorful rug while the adults discussed the day's events. "The Nebraska delegation seems serious about adopting the full model," Jackson noted as he helped Miguel prepare the salad. "Vegetables harvested that morning from the center's fields. Their veteran population needs the support," Miguel replied. His own journey from international business student to agricultural education director had been influenced by his uncle's involvement with the shelter and his subsequent work with the center. "Their rural communities are struggling with the same issues we faced here." Lily, reviewing educational materials for the next day's school visit, looked up with a smile. "Remember when everyone thought Dad had lost his mind? Now governors and senators are lining up to replicate what we've built." Jackson chuckled. "Pretty sure Stanley Wilson is still shocked every time he chairs a board meeting. From giving me 1 year, tops, to advocating for regenerative agriculture across the state, that might be the most unlikely transformation of all." As they sat down to the family meal, Maria Elena insisted on saying grace, her small voice solemnly thanking God for the food and the people who grew it, a prayer she had learned at the center's daycare program. The simple gratitude from his granddaughter's lips touched Jackson deeply, a reminder of why all the work mattered. After dinner, while Lily and Miguel bathed their daughter, Jackson took his customary evening walk to the memorial garden. The path was so familiar he could walk it blindfolded, each step bringing him closer to the quiet space where he still felt Maria's presence most strongly. The garden had matured beautifully over the years, perennial plantings creating year-round interest and structure. Veterans in the program often contributed special plants or decorative elements, many finding solace in tending this peaceful space. Stone benches offered places for reflection, while a small fountain provided gentle background music with its flowing water. Jackson settled on his usual bench, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Tomorrow would bring cameras and officials, speeches and announcements, but tonight was for quiet reflection on the journey that had brought them here. "We did something that matters, Maria," he said softly to the evening air. "Something that will outlast us." The gentle breeze rustled the plantings around him, a familiar and comforting sound. In the distance, lights shone from the veterans' housing area where lives were rebuilding day by day. Beyond them, The educational facilities, where a new generation was learning the connections between caring for the land and caring for each other. Further still, the research greenhouses, where innovations in sustainable agriculture were being developed to address climate challenges. All of it, the entire interwoven community of people, purpose, and place, had grown from seeds planted in moments of both desperation and hope. A failing farm transformed, a grieving farmer renewed, a daughter's future secured, veterans finding healing, a community rediscovering its collaborative spirit. As Jackson walked back toward Lily and Miguel's home, where a light glowed warmly in the gathering darkness, he reflected on the mysterious ways that life's most difficult moments sometimes opened, doors to unimagined possibilities. The financial crisis that had nearly cost him his farm, the grief that had isolated him from his community, the drought that had diminished his harvest. All of these challenges had converged to create the circumstances for that pivotal decision, to give away everything he had harvested rather than trying to salvage something from it. A decision that had seemed like financial suicide at the time, had instead become the foundation for something far more valuable than he could have imagined. Tomorrow, presidential motorcades would once again block his driveway. Cameras would capture carefully staged moments of veterans working alongside schoolchildren in the fields. Officials would make speeches about bipartisan success stories and innovative approaches to complex problems. But the true story wouldn't be found in those public moments. It lived in the quiet transformation of lives touched by the center's work, the veteran who slept through the night without nightmares for the first time in years, the child who understood where food came from and why it mattered, the farmer who discovered that sustainable practices could protect both land and livelihood. It lived in the relationships formed across divisions of politics, generation, and experience. It lived in the renewed soil and cleaner water and more resilient community that had developed around a shared purpose. As Jackson reached Lily's front porch, he could hear his granddaughter's laughter inside, the sound of the future taking shape, bright with possibility. The legacy of that one harvest, freely given, would continue to grow through seasons yet to come, nourishing both land and lives in ways that no one could have predicted when it all began. One small choice, one selfless act, one life forever changed, and countless others along with it. The autumn colors painted Millfield County in gold and crimson as Jackson Whitaker, now approaching 60, watched the harvest in progress. 10 years had passed since that desperate season when he had donated his entire crop to the veterans' shelter, a decade of transformation beyond anything he could have imagined. The Whitaker Center for Veterans and Sustainable Agriculture had become a national model, replicated in 43 states. What had begun as one farmer's impulsive act of generosity had evolved into a movement transforming both veteran care and sustainable farming across America. "Grandpa, come see," called 7-year-old Maria Elena, named for the grandmother she had never met. She ran toward him with boundless energy, her dark braids bouncing. Behind her walked her father, Miguel, and her 3-year-old brother, Thomas. "Oh, what have you found, sunshine?" Jackson asked, kneeling to her level. "The perfect pumpkin for the ceremony," she announced proudly. "It's orange and round and beautiful." Taking his hand, she pulled him toward the pumpkin patch where school groups were selecting specimens for the annual harvest festival. As the oldest grandchild, she would participate in the 10-year anniversary celebration, presenting a harvest basket to the distinguished guests. The center bustled with activity as final preparations took shape. Security personnel conducted preliminary sweeps, their presence a reminder of tomorrow's high-profile visitors. At the main administrative building, Jackson found Lily in her office, speaking rapidly into a headset. "Confirm the video link with the satellite centers for 2 p.m. Eastern," she was saying. We want all 43 locations participating in the nationwide segment. At 33, Lily had grown into a poised, confident leader who now served as the center's executive director. Her Cornell education in agricultural sciences, combined with an MBA, made her uniquely qualified to guide the organization's continued growth. "Everything on track?" Jackson asked after she ended her call. "As much as it can be with a presidential visit, 3 cabinet secretaries, both senators, the governor, and international delegations," Lily replied with a smile that reminded Jackson painfully of Maria. "Have you finished your speech?" "Still working on it," Jackson admitted, "trying to keep it simple and honest." "Like you," Miguel observed. "That's why people listen when you speak, Jackson. No political polish, just genuine conviction." As evening approached, Jackson made his way to a small hill overlooking the center's sprawling campus. From this vantage point, he could see the full extent of what had been created. The original farmhouse now served as a museum and welcome center, preserving the story of how everything began. Around it had grown a comprehensive campus, including training facilities, research greenhouses, educational buildings, veteran housing, and administrative offices. Beyond stretched hundreds of acres of sustainably managed fields demonstrating various techniques and approaches. Stanley Wilson, now in his 80s but still sharp-minded, joined him. The once skeptical farmer who had given Jackson 1 year tops had become one of the program's most stalwart advocates. "Quite a view," Stanley remarked, leaning on his cane. "Your grandfather wouldn't recognize the place." "I'm not sure I recognize it sometimes," Jackson admitted. "That's because you weren't thinking about building an empire," Stanley observed. "You were just trying to do the right thing in a hard moment. That's always been the difference with you." That evening, Jackson joined Lily, Miguel, and their children for dinner. Elena Hernandez, now in her 80s and considered the honorary grandmother of the entire center, had prepared her famous enchiladas. Carlos, her brother-in-law, who had been instrumental in the center's early veteran programs, entertained the children with stories. "Remember when we thought the most exciting thing about Jackson's donation was getting fresh vegetables at the shelter?" Ramirez reminisced. The former shelter director now supervised the national network of veteran training programs. After dinner, little Maria Elena approached Jackson with a serious expression. "Grandpa, can we visit Grandma Maria's garden? I want to make sure it looks perfect for tomorrow." The memorial garden had expanded over the years into a beautiful contemplative space where veterans often found peace. Maria Elena had developed a special connection to the place, often spending quiet time there among the flowers. They walked together through the twilight, the little girl skipping occasionally as she pointed out features of the center. The memorial garden was beautiful in the fading light, solar-powered lanterns beginning to glow softly along the pathways. "Do you think Grandma Maria would like how everything turned out?" she asked suddenly, looking up at Jackson with eyes so like her grandmother's that it sometimes startled him. "I think she would love it," he said truthfully. "Especially the parts that help people heal and grow." "Mom says she was very kind and smart," Maria Elena continued, "and that she believed in growing food to help people, not just to sell." "That's exactly right," Jackson confirmed, touched by how Lily had ensured her children knew their grandmother's values. "Everything we do here started with her ideas about what farming should be." As they walked hand in hand back toward Lily's house, Maria Elena looked up at the emerging stars. "Grandpa, will you tell me again about the day you decided to give away all the food?" It was a story she had heard many times, but children find comfort in the repetition of family lore. "Well, it was a very hard time for me," he began. "Your grandmother had been gone for 3 years. The farm was struggling. There had been a drought, and much of my harvest had been rejected for not looking perfect, even though it was perfectly good food. Later that night, alone in his cottage, Jackson finally completed his speech for the anniversary ceremony. Honest reflections on the journey from desperation to purpose, from isolation to community, from one man's struggle to a movement that had changed thousands of lives. Morning arrived clear and bright. By dawn, the center was already in motion. Security teams conducting final sweeps, staff placing chairs for the outdoor ceremony, media crews setting up equipment, volunteers arranging displays showcasing the center's decade of achievements. Jackson, dressed in a simple but dignified suit, walked the grounds one last time before visitors arrived. Each location held memories. The spot where he had first met Ramirez from the shelter, the field where local volunteers had helped harvest the crops, the driveway where the presidential motorcade had first arrived. At the memorial garden now, immaculately prepared thanks to Maria Elena's attention, he paused for a private moment. 10 years, Maria, he said softly. Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. By mid-morning, the center had filled with guests, program graduates in their distinctive green blazers, government officials, international delegates, and community members who had supported the center from its earliest days. The presidential motorcade arrived on schedule, Secret Service agents moving with practiced efficiency. This time, Jackson greeted the president not as a struggling farmer, surprised by sudden attention, but as the founder and chairman of a nationally recognized organization. The president, a different one than had visited 10 years ago, representing the opposite political party but equally supportive, toured the facilities before the formal ceremony. "You've created something remarkable here," the president observed as they viewed the research greenhouses, "something that transcends the usual partisan divisions." "That wasn't the goal," Jackson replied honestly. "We just wanted to help veterans heal while growing good food." The rest followed naturally. When they reached the memorial garden, the president paused respectfully. "This is where it all began. Your wife's memorial." "In a way," Jackson acknowledged. "Maria believed in farming to feed people, to build community. When I lost sight of that after her death, this place reminded me. Now it reminds all of us." The formal ceremony took place on the great lawn between the original farmhouse and the newer facilities. Hundreds of chairs faced a stage decorated with harvest bounty. Behind the stage, a massive video screen would connect the celebration with satellite centers across the country. Jackson took his place among dignitaries and program leaders, catching sight of his family in the front row, Lily and Miguel, their children dressed in their finest, Maria Elena clutching the harvest basket she would present. Behind them sat Elena, Carlos, and other original supporters. Further back were veterans who had found healing through the program, community members who had volunteered, and farmers who had adopted sustainable practices. When his turn came to speak, Jackson approached the podium with his straightforward manner. 10 years ago," he began, "I stood in my fields facing financial ruin, still grieving the loss of my wife, and made what everyone in town considered a crazy decision: to donate my entire harvest to hungry veterans rather than trying to salvage something from it." He paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. That decision wasn't strategic or calculated. It was simply the right thing to do in that moment. A way to honor my wife's belief that we farm to feed people, not just to make money. As Jackson continued his simple narrative of how one act had led to another, how community support had grown from initial skepticism, how programs had developed organically, the audience listened with rapt attention. "What we've built here isn't about me," he concluded. "It's about what happens when we recognize our connectedness to the land, to each other, to those who have served our country, to future generations. It's about remembering that the true measure of success isn't what we accumulate, but what we contribute." Little Maria Elena approached the stage with her harvest basket, presenting it to the president with a solemn dignity that made Jackson's heart swell with pride. The symbolic gesture, echoing the original donation, provided the perfect transition to the nationwide simultaneous harvest celebration broadcast on the video screens. The remainder of the day unfolded in a blend of formal recognition and community celebration. Awards were presented, new initiatives announced, partnerships formalized. As evening approached and most official guests departed, the center transitioned to a community harvest festival. Finally, as the autumn sun began to set, Jackson found himself back at the memorial garden with Lily. 10 years, she said quietly. Mum would be so proud of what you've built. What we've built, Jackson corrected gently. I may have made the first decision, but you and so many others made it grow into what it is today. They stood together, in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the western sky in gold and crimson above the fields that had been in their family for generations. Fields that now served as healing grounds for wounded warriors, educational laboratories for sustainable practices, and community gathering places. What do you think about the next 10 years? Lily asked eventually. Jackson considered this, looking out over the center. I think it's for your generation to shape now, he said, and Maria Elena's after that. My part was getting it started. The future belongs to all of you. As darkness fell and the festival lights came on across the grounds, Jackson remained for a few moments longer in the memorial garden. The journey from desperate farmer to respected founder had changed him profoundly, healing his grief while giving his life unexpected purpose. The presidential motorcades would come and go. The cameras would capture moments for news cycles that quickly moved on. Politicians would claim connection to successes that served their narratives, but the true legacy lived in less visible impacts. Veterans who slept without nightmares, soil that grew healthier with each season, children who understood where their food came from, communities that remembered how to support their vulnerable members. One decision, one donation, one moment of choosing, generosity over self-preservation. The ripples continued to spread, touching lives far beyond what Jackson could see or measure, creating possibilities he could never have envisioned when he stood in his drought-stricken fields a decade earlier. In the distance, he could see Maria Elena running across the lawn with other children, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The next generation, already learning the lessons that would shape their understanding of stewardship, service, and community. The true harvest, ripening season after season, nourishing both body and spirit for years to come. Some stories never truly end. They simply continue to unfold, season after season, harvest after harvest. The story that began with one farmer's desperate decision had become a living legacy, writing new chapters with each veteran who found healing, each field that regained vitality, each community that rediscovered its capacity for collaboration. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new lives to touch. But tonight, under the autumn stars, Jackson Whitaker stood at the center of what he had helped create and knew with quiet certainty that all of this, had been worth every sacrifice. One harvest freely given, a lifetime of unexpected bounty, returned. Up next, you've got 2 more inspiring stories right on your screen. If this one touched your heart, you won't want to miss these. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories from us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.